And this is fine. It's not a problem as long as your team is predominantly made up of experienced, high-performing, skilled major incident managers who do have the capabilities and the skill sets to actually deliver for the business when it needs them. Hello and welcome. My name is Adam Norman. I'm the CEO here at MIM. MIM is the professional body for IT Major Incident Management, and we deliver our training and certification in the global best practice in IT Major Incident Management to clients in over 95 countries around the world. Now, this might be slightly divisive, and the title of this video may be slightly misleading. So I want to talk about not hiring inexperienced major incident managers for your practice. And that's not quite true. So there absolutely is a place for new and either inexperienced, no experience or less experienced hires and developing their skill set in your major incident practice. But it is a balance. What you often see is there are companies who actually have quite substantial downtime, so the actual risks, the reputational damage can be quite severe. They're fairly big public companies. The outages may cost them substantial amounts of money, whether it's reputational damage, whether it's even just mobilising the operation because they're such large organisations. They absolutely are into the millions in terms of each major incident as a potential risk. So you do see those companies often hiring inexperienced major incident managers throughout their practice or practices if they have multiple locations, or promoting people to the role who have never done it before. And this is fine. It's not a problem as long as your team is predominantly made up of experienced, high-performing, skilled major incident managers who do have the capabilities and the skill sets to actually deliver for the business when it needs them. And if you're going to hire less experienced major incident managers, or indeed people who have not done the role before, you must have structured learning programs for them. And what is most common, I think, is probably this resulting from budget constraints. So caps on salaries for major incident managers, and it's not really appropriate for where the market is, meaning you're going to struggle for the salaries you're offering to get more experienced and skilled people. And so they end up with a whole team, or a large percentage of the team, who do not really have the experience or the skill sets to deliver, and they also don't give them any kind of structured training program. So therefore, your whole major incident practice ends up relatively ineffective, or a large percentage of it, when those individuals are running it, are not as effective as the business needs. Now, nowhere else in the operation would we actually do this. If we think about technical subject matter experts, they all have training. They go through various technical disciplines. We expect them to have various certifications, or at least a lot of hands-on experience. And we wouldn't even consider taking a non-technical person and putting them in a specific discipline at a third line level, for example. It would make no sense. It would be very unfair on the person. They would struggle, and the business would suffer as a result of it, let alone if that person ended up potentially as a technical person on a major incident with other technical people. They drown. They would not be able to succeed in the role. So we're setting them up for failure, and we're setting ourselves up for failure. Yet we do this in major incident management all the time. And I think it's a hangover from old industry practices where, because major incident management wasn't massively understood, it was very much a case of we believed process was king and it's the main thing that matters. As long as we have a really good process, we can give that to anyone. They should be able to run a major instance. Now I ask you, if your company potentially is going to lose 3, 10, 20 million pounds on potentially one major instance or multiple major instances throughout the year, or substantially more money, or reputational damage, why would we take that risk? There's no logic involved. We're exposing ourselves and the business to a really unnecessary risk. When you think about the types of outages, then it starts to make sense to push back when you have these budget constraints. Now look, I live in the real world. I know it's very easy for me to say this. I'm sat on camera, writing and delivering standards. It's really easy for me I don't have the constraints that a lot of you have. But that doesn't mean I'm wrong. It doesn't mean just because your company or your next level of management or their management has said, I'm sorry, this is the budget, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't try and provide them with more information that shifts their viewpoint. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't go, well, actually, look, this is the type of people we will be able to acquire with that budget or that salary level, and this is the amount of downtime and what it actually costs us. So, as I mentioned, if one major incident might cost the business £10 million, for example, which is pretty reasonable for a very large company with a major outage, and we have multiple major incidents a year, then investing, for example, in a 10-person major incident team with skilled and experienced staff for 1.5 or 2 million makes a lot of logical sense for the commercial entity. And it's our job to bring the facts and the data together to obviously highlight that to whoever perhaps is causing the constraint in budget. What I would say though, equally, if we've got a business that is doing, has very few major incidents, and more modern companies tend to have this, they don't have much legacy infrastructure, the way the systems and architecture is built, it's very different, uptimes, essentially easier to come by for them, and they have their exposure is really limited. So let's say they have very few major incidents, it might be worth 500,000 to them, but it's not particularly public facing, doesn't do a lot of damage to customers. Well then, of course, equally, it makes no sense to build out 100 major incident manager practice across 4 different countries and hire really expensive people who are earning big salaries with loads of experience. So we have to understand each business, and I say this a lot, understand the business you're working for, what it actually needs and what's appropriate for that business. Without trying to understand the actual impacts, it's very difficult to do. So going back to inexperienced hires, we do and should have them on the team, but we need to maintain a good ratio of highly skilled, experienced, capable major incident managers who can support our less experienced or developing major incident managers and new people to the team. There has to be a really healthy ratio of that, or again, we're exposing ourselves to a really unnecessary risk. So you also can't bring them in and then figure it out as you go. If your intention is to bring some inexperienced people or less experienced major incident managers into your practice, you must have a structured program to support and develop them. Again, otherwise it's not fair on them and it's not fair on the rest of the team or the business, and it exposes us to an unnecessary risk. If you think about the structured programs of training, it's going to include things like leadership training, it's going to include communication skills, conflict management, all these things. And there's loads of ways that we can do this. We also obviously need the technical aspects like process, etc. But we can do this in a systematized way. It can be a combination of training programs. They can be internal. Obviously, we have training programs, but it doesn't necessarily have to be ours. It can be books. So as a combination, so you can give them specific books that they need to read, digest on leadership. Some excellent books out there. It can be shadowing and having the appropriate amount of time for them to get mentorship, coaching, and being able to watch perhaps your best performers. But it needs to be structured and it needs to be systematized and refined so that you know every time you bring someone in, you give them the best possible chance of succeeding and can get them up to scratch as quickly as possible. It needs to be systematized. You need to focus on it and you need to revisit and tweak and improve it to make sure you almost have a system where you can turn out new skilled major incident managers. That also means you're constantly developing those people to become your more experienced hires in the future, so that as people do when they move on or retire, etc., you now have more experienced people and you maintain that ratio of less experienced to more experienced staff. You also need to protect them against which major incidents they're handling. You don't want to leave someone who is relatively inexperienced, still developing, to deal with the worst major incident you've ever had and not have them have the ability to contact and bring on one of your more experienced major incident managers. That can obviously end pretty disastrously. So we know that major incident management is a leadership role. Yes, tools and technology matter. Yes, process matters. But actually all the skills required to be a good, competent major incident manager are leadership skills. They're people skills. They're a very specific skill set. And so we need to develop that in people the same way we would any kind of technical discipline. And I think sometimes because it's referred to as the soft skills and the leadership and I think a lot of people assume that one has it or they don't. They have that capability. But it can absolutely be learned and trained. And you can absolutely use the mental models and frameworks to deal with the complex situations. And you can develop assertiveness, learn to control bridge calls better, learn to keep stakeholders happy. So it's really, really important. So we absolutely do want to bring in new talent. We absolutely do want to develop them. We simply don't want to make up a whole team of major incident managers who don't have the relevant experience for our specific business needs and what the business needs protection against. We need this ratio. I personally like the 10% ratio. I think that's a healthy one to have either new or very inexperienced. 10% of the team is that, and 90% of the team is experienced hires. That's possibly, though, because I predominantly end up working with very large established companies and the risks in their downtime is so substantial. As I said, it matters the business you're with. If you're in a very small company, that ratio might look different. You can obviously play with this. You could have 80-20, 80% experienced, 20% less experienced. You could have 70-30. It very much depends, but it also depends on your structured training program, how you turn out and how quickly you can turn out new, skilled, experienced major incident managers. You don't want to be stuck or lose a load of experienced hires and suddenly that ratio ends up 50-50. You're going to end up with some problems. So one thing I will add is I've had a bit of a rant here, but one thing I'll add, there absolutely are really experienced hires, and we've all seen them, who come into the role and we think this is going to be a star performer and they just fail to deliver. Of course, there are those people out there. Sometimes they're fed up with the job, they no longer have the passion for it, so they don't bring the same energy. Sometimes it's just a wrong cultural fit for them and your company. Doesn't mean there's anything wrong with them, maybe they just need to be a company with a very different culture. And so there is that. I'm not saying that all experienced hires are going to be your star performers. Equally, there are people who have never done major incident management who come in and extremely quickly become highly effective, and they'll be a rising star and rising talent. So I'm not saying these don't exist. However, these are not the norm. Of course, the experience matters, as all things in the professional world. Having that experience to deal with these stressful situations, knowing process, and having gone through this many, many times before leads to someone's ability and confidence to deal with these situations. So we obviously need to, with each of those, we obviously need to deal with them slightly differently. If you've got somebody who is a really experienced hire, no longer needs to, or feels they no longer need to make the effort, or can't be bothered, or doesn't have the passion, whatever it may be, we either need to support them in getting them back up to scratch, or we need to find something more suitable for them, whether it's in our own organisation or externally. In the long run, they will be happier for it, and so will you and the team. Equally, the rising star, that young talent, we need to continually help them develop and really reach their capabilities, and that might mean some extra attention, and we need to give them more responsibility so that they are able to progress and really nurture that rising talent. So we behave slightly differently with them. In summary, know your business. I've said this so many times. We have to know the business, or the business we're trying to serve, and what it actually needs from us. And we need to hire accordingly and structure our team accordingly. We have to think strategically about this. We have to understand the skills that major incident managers actually need and make sure they have them either prior to landing with us and starting, or through a structured training program of our own. Don't hire a whole team with really limited or no experience in major incident management, and they'd be really surprised when the level of performance is not what you expected, or not at a standard that you might see elsewhere, where they have loads of really experienced hires and a more substantial capability and skill set than those who don't. So I know this sounds really obvious, but again, I've seen this enough times now to know it's not an isolated incident. So hopefully for some of you, this will make sense, and it might be the missing piece is okay, yep, makes more sense. Maybe we need to adjust our talent acquisition, retention, development strategy, and what we're doing with the major incident practice. I'd love to hear any questions you have, or any comments or your own experiences on this. I'll look forward to seeing you next time.